We are thrilled to be able to share with you about the BARDA and NIOSH Mask Innovation Challenge. And we have a pretty exciting panel of industry and academic experts who are going to talk to you about the state of innovation for currently available masks and what the future might look like for the next generation of masks. So again, we're super thrilled for you to be here. We really appreciate your time, and I hope that you find this session really exciting, and as exciting as it has been for us to put together. So with that, we have 4 panelists on the line who will be talking this afternoon after we give a quick overview of the prize challenge. But I want to go ahead and introduce them real quick. We have Dr. Emily Blum on the line. She's a panelist. She serves as the medical director working at GCMI, and she's passionate about bridging the medical technology ecosystem of Atlanta and bringing in new programs and innovative ideas from local physicians. We also have Dr. Sung-Mi Park. She is a principal research scientist in the School of Materials Science and Engineering at Georgia Tech. She's an expert in the material development space, and she's worked with many international companies and also nationally on many different topics. So she's going to bring a great perspective on the material science. We have Adrian Yurius, who is from the Detection Diagnostics and Devices Infrastructure, also known as DDDI division in BARDA, and he is a contractor through BARDA. He supports many projects on the chemical burn, manufacturing influenza, and also many of our other vaccine projects within the Division of Research, Innovation, and Ventures and DRIVE. He's really a jack of all trades. He does everything from microneedle patches to wearables to respirator design. And then last but not least, we have Dr. I'm going to do my best to say this correctly, Sundaresan Jayaraman on the line. He is also from Georgia Tech. He works very closely with Dr. Sung-Mi Park, and he is a pioneer in bringing about the convergence of textiles and computing, and his research has been critical in shifting the paradigm of fabric as the computer. So again, we're thrilled to have them on the line today. I hope that you find their expertise and their insight helpful as you're thinking about your own mask designs, or if you're just generally interested in learning about more. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adrian now to lead us through a quick overview of the Mask Innovation Challenge before we kick things off.
All right, thank you, Kamiko. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. All right. So starting off, and as Kamiko said, it's like we're going to be introducing or talking about a little bit the Mask Innovation Challenge with BARDA and NIOSH, building tomorrow's mask. Just a quick ASPR and BARDA and the overview, and then going over the Mask Innovation Challenge and talking about some of the logistics about it. ASPR is the Assistant Secretary of Preparedness and Response. Its mission is to save lives and protect Americans from health security threats. BARDA is underneath ASPR, and the BARDA model is aimed at creating medical countermeasures and to look at many different needs in the space in terms of being able to address anything that happens, including things like pandemics. BARDA is unique in that it looks at public-private partnerships to drive innovation. It's not just purely government doing it, and it's a combination of the two working together to be able to move these products forward. It's just a quick overview. So what I'm here today is to talk about the Mask Innovation Challenge. This is a challenge that was worked through and created through the efforts of both BARDA and NIOSH working together. The main goal of the challenge is to improve the comfort, utility, and protective factor of available masks that are used by the general population. Ideally, as a result of these changes, increasing the level of trust and adherence to the mask use amongst the American public is the goal. As I'm sure a number of you are already aware, there's a number of barriers to current mask usage. and you yourself may have come across some of these. Basically, there's a lot of masks that are out there that make a number of claims, but they're often untested. So people don't really know how protective they are. Sometimes there's a discomfort of just wearing them. Sometimes wearing them too long, the material not quite fitting properly. Sometimes there's issues, as with me, if you're wearing glasses, if glasses fogging up, depending on the type of mask. It's like if it's a little bit thicker, you may have issues with speech intelligibility. And so you often see people pulling down their mask to talk, which is probably one of the worst things they can do. And this not understanding, it's like, oh, and what's the right one? What is this doing for me? There's a lack of knowledge and standard in terms of understanding what these masks are for. And is this protecting me? Is this protecting them? Is it both? And how do I know what I'm buying? Is it safe or not? So what we're looking for, as we mentioned before, target audience is the general public. The healthcare workers, that's a whole nother type of challenge that we've looked at and we've been working on addressing for a number of years. But now that this is a commonplace for the public, we want to kind of see a standard for that. What can we do to try to move this forward? Because there's no idea, there's no common mentality in terms of what does a public use mask mean? So we wanted to open this up, especially with a lot of people now wearing them for a year. What are some ideas that we can improve upon? We did what we could in the moment, but now we've seen there's a lot of issues, as we just discussed. So what can people do now to make these better? What can we improve on to kind of help increase, whether it's protective factor, the fit, that people feel more comfortable wearing them, and just address some of those common everyday issues that we've all come across at this point. And so along those lines, so we looked at two main innovation tracks. One looks something like similar to what your mask looks like today. It's like, what are improvements that we can make to the mask that we normally do? Something that goes over your ears or something around your head, and something that covers your face, and that you breathe through. What kind of innovation can we draw to those types of things? Is it new materials? Is it something on the mask that are a little bit different? So that's one path. The other path is something that's completely different than how we typically envision a mask. And this is something that's a little bit more out there. Maybe there's something that's providing an air source, not that's already built in like an oxygen tank or something, but more so that it's purifying the air that's getting to the wearer. Just something really unique, something out there, but something that ultimately may kind of remove some of the barriers that we currently see with people using masks. So just at a high level, some of the judging criteria that we're looking at, and for any submissions, we're looking at, first and foremost, innovation. Is this something that's going to push the industry forward? Is this something that is not just a slight variation of what we've already seen and what's already out there, but is this something that's going to really kind of change how we look at masks? And so that's something that's important to kind of see. Is this important? But it can't just be some off-the-wall idea with nothing that can support it. Ideally, if there's data to support it, that's great. It's like, but something that's grounded in reality. We want to make sure that it's something that ultimately can be produced at the end of the day, and something that can be made and mass manufactured. So this is something that's available. We can't spend $5,000 on the perfect mask for every single person. And so that's where the technological feasibility comes in. It's like, so we're going to be evaluating it on that sense. Okay, does this make sense? It does, not only is it going to work and do whatever you claim it's going to do, but is this manufacturable? Is this something that, looking at all these factors, does this look real? And so looking at, all the barriers we mentioned earlier, does this address them? Or which ones does it address? And to make sure that this is something that we are ultimately looking for. And then there's an overall, what makes sense about this mask? Is it well-rounded? How many things does it address? And does it fit our needs going forward? And just as an exclusion criteria, because we know there's a lot of interest, we want to make sure that, we're not going to be using accepting certain aspects of submissions. For example, if someone puts like the ear loops, for example, to make them so they're not injuring your ears, putting your mask, that's not really what we're looking for. Whatever you submit has to be something that you own yourself. You can't just modify a currently existing N95 or a current existing mask that you don't own. That's something that you have to wholly own, kind of what you're submitting. And so that's one thing we want to look at. We also want to make sure that we're not accepting something that's more along the lines of therapeutic type stuff, whether it's creams or something that you have to inhale or something that you have to take a pill for. Those are all something that, not that they're not good ideas, but that's just not the point of this particular challenge, and plus the money that we're looking at for the challenge winners would not move that forward at all. So we want to kind of really keep it to what we've talked about before already. And let's see if there's anything else. And this, we're not taking something that's just slightly modifying to something that's already cleared by NIOSH or FDA. We're looking for something that's new that hasn't already been cleared. And then just to kind of sum up a little bit, the price person we're looking at, there's gonna be 2 phases for this challenge, total for $500,000. For phase 1, up to 10 winners will be eligible to receive up to $10,000 each. These are going to be based just on pure paper submissions. We're not accepting any prototypes for those first round. So this is where we're just looking at your ideas and saying, do you fit what we were asking for? The phase 2, up to 5 winners will be selected to split a total of $400,000. This is where we're going to get a little bit more detail, kind of saying, it's like, okay, well, what can we do to kind of support this and get something in our hands that we could actually see and test, is this viable? So time-wise, if you are interested and you haven't submitted yet, I recommend you do it soon, as our deadline is April 21st to submit something for the phase 1. Anyone can still submit for the phase 2, but it's going to be a much harder criteria to get into phase 2 if you were not part of phase 1. And phase 2 is more of the proof of concept stage, like I mentioned before. And if any of you are interested, I'll just leave this page up as at the end here. On how to enter. There's a website and there's a link. I don't know if these slides are going to be provided to people, but maybe this link at least can be put in and sent out to people so that they can look at it later on their own time. All right, so that's just a quick overview. We're happy to answer any questions. It's like, we have the whole panel to answer much different things. So at this point, I'll turn it back over. Thank you.
Thank you for that overview, Adrian. Really appreciate it. Just to answer a quick question, and again, we'll have a Q&A at the very end to answer some of your other questions, but I don't want to delay the panel discussion any further. But to quickly answer, we cannot disclose the number of submissions that we have received. So I highly recommend that you get your submission in before the deadline to be considered. So thank you. Moving forward now, let's get the panel together. Emily, are we able to show all of the panelists on one screen? Thank you. All right, so we're going to start things off. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today. We're so happy to have you here. And I figure we could start things off with a more simple and straightforward question that kind of just sets the stage for why we're doing this and what things currently look like. So how do face masks work? How does the filtration mechanism work for both inhales and exhales? So let's start there. I'm going to call on Dr. Park first.
Yes, the face mask. So typically the face mask has the different components which the responsible for all those the filtration goes on the top of your face, which has the filter. Nowadays, most of filter is made of the non-woven fabric, and also that is with the polypropylene the fiber, which has a lot of the wicking property, which means when you breathe, you are kind of having a lot of moisture from your mouth as well. So the polypropylene, which has a good wicking property, takes a moisture out from the mask inside, and the other the moisture does not go into it. That is the good property of the filter material, which is polypropylene. And so like that, the filter takes all the residue from your mouth to the outside, but it protects something coming from the outside to the inside. So it protects from from the outside environment. At the same time, I'm protecting other people from my residue.
Thank you. Would any of our other panelists like to add their thoughts? Sundaresan, I know you particularly are an expert in this field, so can you give us your own thoughts on how does the filtration mechanism of these masks work, and what do you see as an opportunity with these to be innovated on?
That's a very, very good question. And first of all, thank you again for organizing this challenge. I think it's a very good opportunity for bringing all the nation's brain trust to addressing this issue. Now, what is the role of the mask? The role of the mask is to make sure that whatever bad things are in you do not go outside, and whatever is bad outside does not come into you. So first and foremost, what the filter does, or the filtration mechanism, the mask has to filter the bad guys from coming in and the bad guys from going out. So what the filtration mechanism does is, let's think of it this way. If you take a saran wrap and put it on your face, then it's going to filter all the bad guys from coming in, but at the same time, after a few minutes, you're going to pass out. So the idea here is to be able to, as the first slide said, to be able to match the comfort and the protection. So you got to balance both of them. So the filtration efficiency is what tells you how effective the filter is in terms of protecting the bad guys from going in and bad guys from going out. At the same time, you as an end user needs to be comfortable. And that's what in BARDA's requirement is the first and foremost thing is comfort. So you need to think about not only filtering the bad guys, but also keeping you as an end user comfortable. Because only if you're comfortable and it protects you, are you going to be able to use the mask. So when we talk in terms of mask efficiency, we are talking about the effectiveness of the mask, which is a function of how good the filtration is, how comfortable it is, and how likely you are to use it. So ease of use in your designs is also very, very important, because if it's going to take me a PhD to be able to figure out how to put the mask, then it's too late. So as you're designing the mask, what we want you to think about is, for it to be effective. So it needs to filter, it needs to be comfortable. It is something that people are going to wear. At the end of the day, each of us has to make a commitment to be able to wear it. And when you do that, then your filtration efficiency, your breathing resistance, all these things come together.
So as a follow-up question to that, because that's something that we've been learning as we go, is that it's a trade-off, right, between filtration efficiency and breathability. So have you seen anything recently that's been able to help balance that? Because it seems like as filtration efficiency increases, breathability decreases. So has there been anything interesting that you've seen that will address that?
That's a very, very good question. So if you think about it, right? So that is what I call the grand challenge in respiratory protection. Because if I take a bandage cloth that's very comfortable, but guess what? All the bad guys are going to come in. So today what researchers are doing is being able to make the structures as compact as possible. So the interstices are small, but at the same time using materials which will still let the air come through, but have multiple layers of filters, for instance. So if you increase the surface area over which the bad guys will get caught, but still have the ability for the air to go through from you and to the outside, then you're going to be comfortable and achieve the filtration efficiency that you were talking about, Kamiko.
And just to kind of go a little bit further in terms of expanding a little bit about what was just said, when we're talking about comfort, it composes not only like one aspect is resistance to breathing. So the more efficient the filter is at stopping something from coming in, obviously the 100% scenario is the saran wrap. But even the N95s they typically see with the healthcare workers, that has a lot of air resistance that makes it difficult to wear for a long period of time. And that's where some people have difficulty. But unlike healthcare workers, we're not all surrounded by patients when we're working for 8, 10, 12-hour shifts. And so we don't need something that's necessarily that level. And so if we have a lower efficiency level, we also increase our ability to breathe in and out. So that resistance goes down. So it is a trade-off. And this is where it comes in terms of what you're trying to ultimately solve. And what's your risk level in terms of if you're just at the grocery market once a week for an hour, okay, you don't need something that's going to be that high that you're going to have a hard time breathing through. But it's something that you still want something to have some protective level, something to be able to breathe. But the other factor that we need to consider when we talk about comfort is that not only do you have to talk about the filter, any good if it's not fitting well on your face. Because if all the air is coming in from the sides, that's not protecting anything. And so how do you judge that? So being able to look at all those different factors, how well does it fit? How much does it check as a whole, not just the material, but as a whole, and how well it fits your face. So these are all things that you have to kind of consider when you talk about what's coming in and what's not. And the one big thing that you could do if you're having something with more, with a higher protection level, is you increase the surface area. So if you have a much larger mask, it can be the same material, but it's easier to breathe through because you have more surface for the air to get in through. So there's all these variables that you can play with, but ultimately at the end, what's your comfort level? And for different people, it may vary. So that's just another take on how I look at this.
Actually, Adrian,
so
I'm sorry,
Go
I could just add to that one. Adrian hit a very, very important point, right? So when we, a lot of people focus on the filtration efficiency, but the key thing here in real estate, we talk about location, 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 right? In mask, it's fit, fit, fit. Because even if it's 100% filtration efficiency, but if it does not fit you properly, the bad guys are going to come from the sides or from the top, or your glasses get fogged. So the balance between filtration efficiency, the fit, and the comfort, that nice triangle is what we need to be aiming for.
I think that's a great segue into our next question, which is basically just thinking about, well, what are the current limitations and challenges associated with non-medical face masks that we have? And, I guess to that end, what are some of the most important factors to think about with face masks for the general public? Because the requirements that the average person has when they go to the grocery store is very different than somebody who works with patients all day. So what do you think are the current limitations? And it sounds like you've already alluded to one of them, which is fit. And then after that, I'd actually like to hear from Dr. Blum and get her perspective as well.
Absolutely. I think that there are two different elements that you have to consider when you're considering the limitations. You're considering the limitations from a scientific standpoint, and those limitations are how well it's going to filter, both inhaled and exhaled, right? Are we looking at masks that are just source control, or are we looking for two-way protection? You see all these people walking around because with these masks that have those exhalation valves. And when I see patients in my clinic, the first thing I do when I see someone with an exhalation valve is I hand them a secondary mask. I say, great, you're protecting yourself, protect other people too, because that's the purpose of the mask that you're wearing right now, unless you have that great fit. So I think that the two aspects are the scientific approach of making a mask that is going to get a great fit for commercial use and is going to have a broad application. I have a small face. I have this great mask that I love wearing. I put it around my ears. I get gaps everywhere. I've started tying it behind my head and I tie it tight. And when I do that, I feel comfortable going into patient rooms with that mask on because I don't feel like I'm exposed. So making a mask that has good commercial fit for the masses, but just because it fits well doesn't mean it's comfortable. So you need a mask that people are going to buy. And so you need a mask that as you're talking, it's not slipping down below your nose, that people don't feel the need to constantly readjust it, because every time they readjust it, they're contaminating themselves, they're contaminating the surroundings around them. Something that's comfortable, that they feel that they can breathe through. So you're not just talking about pressure drop that they can actually breathe through, but a mask that they also feel that they can breathe through as well, that moisture isn't building up. And moisture, as Dr. J and Dr. Park, they talk about in their paper as well, moisture is a killer for these masks. As soon as they get wet, you're gonna have a decreased ability for these to properly filter both in and out. And reusability is going to be really important too. These are people that aren't necessarily going to want to spend a lot of money taking a mask, throwing it out at the end of every day. The more they use a reusable mask without proper cleaning techniques, the more contaminated they are, the less efficient this mask is going to be. So you need to consider from a consumer standpoint how much they can clean it, how reusable is it, if it's a disposable mask, how long that disposable mask is going to be able to last for, and the economic constraints around that as well. The other big thing that I see when I see patients come in through the hospital, through the clinic, and just in everyday life, and the bane of my existence is people feeling the need to pull down the mask when they're talking. I'm a surgeon. I wear a mask for 8 to 12 hours a day, and never once in the OR have I felt the need to pull down my mask to speak to someone. You don't have to, but there is a perception in the world that if you're talking on the cell phone, you can't have your mask in the way of the microphone. People can hear you just fine. That's the reality. But the perceived notion from the general public is that you can't. So how do we minimize that perceived notion of decreased audibility through these masks?
Yeah, that's a great point. And, it's something that I myself experience when I wear masks, that they just don't quite fit right. It's not a one size fits all. And it gets back to that major point that Sundari mentioned earlier, which is fit. You can have the mask with the greatest filtration efficiency in the world, but if it doesn't fit right and patients don't understand how to use it properly, then it just doesn't matter. So what about me? What do you think? What do you think are some of the current limitations that you see from a material science standpoint?
Right. From the material standpoint, like we presented in our paper, we need to select a good material, especially in a filter, which it should have a very good dry fit, which means any moisture coming out from the mouth, it should be dried very quickly. Otherwise, it builds a lot of different bacteria, the different the harmful diseases coming in. So like what Emily said, we need to have a good decontamination method so people can use it more than once. It should be repeatedly they can use it. And also another point, we've been wearing a mask for more than a year. So now the people are kind of tired of wearing masks, and also the mask is good in terms of the function wise, but it does not, it kind of prevents from the design standpoint. So the people try to make with the different material, with a lot of beads and the different the material goes on the mask, which adds the weight on the mask. So they give the discomfort, and also this will decrease the function of the mask as well. But we cannot help it. The people need the kind of good design and the colors, the logos, the very nice, the kind of the design to express themselves. So some places they have the mask with the clear plastic in front of it, which it can protect the in and out, but I don't know how they can breathe with it. So they minimize the time, the duration of wearing the mask as well. So there are a lot of drawbacks, but at the same time, the people are making a good mask. Although it does not give the perfect fit, it does not give the perfect penetration or the filtration, but as long as we have a certain level, like the 20% or 25% of filtration of the mask, which every day wearing the mask, then I think that will be also the good gives the filtration and also the good the function of the mask for everyday use.
And related to that, what do you see as the main differences for our listeners between the medical masks that professionals like Emily use in her clinic versus the everyday mask that I would wear when I go to the grocery store or see a friend? Can you elaborate on that?
So I think there's a big misconception in the world as to what the different types of masks are. And at the Global Center for Medical Innovations, we made a big push forward for mask development and to be able to help people. And so we've had to do a big deep dive into this as well. And so it was very enlightening for me to figure out all the different nuances between the different types of masks that are out there. The big mask that everyone has been talking about because of COVID-19 has been the N95 mask. And realizing that there are different levels of N95 masks, being that there are NIOSH approved N95 masks that are meant for construction use, that are meant for everyday exposures versus what are considered surgical N95 masks. Those are those green masks that you see floating around is the most common one that people recognize. And anything that carries that term surgical medical mask, these are masks that have gained FDA approval also through an agreement with NIOSH for the filtration capabilities of them. But these masks are also fluid barriers. And so the purpose of anything that says surgical, medical, dental mask in front of it is that there's a certain level of flammability protection and a certain level of fluid protection. This is meant so that if there are any respiratory particulates, if blood gets on your mask, it's not going to soak through and affect you. From a filtration capacity, the filtration capacity comes from that N95, N99, N98. And even within that, you'll see people talk about P and R ratings too. The N just means that it's not, it's permeable to oils. When you look at P and R ratings too, that gives you an assessment of how permeable these masks are to oils or impermeable these masks are to oils. So there's a huge spectrum. So something that carries a P and an R rating is not going to be considered a medical mask, even though it likely is going to give you better protection than an N95, a surgical N95, because of its ability to filter. It's the surgical quality of it is more of an indication of use than anything else. So you can have a non-medical mask that is distributed to the public that hasn't acquired those fluid ratings and those flammability ratings. That's perfectly fine. But on the same token, you wouldn't see a cloth mask being used in the OR because if blood gets on it, it's going to soak through and contaminate me.
Thank you, Emily. That was a very good description of distinction between the medical and the non-medical mask. But one key point I want to make is this is something as an academician I've been fighting for at least 25 years, is never to use the word N95 and mask in the same thing. N95 is a respirator. Forgive me, Emily, but that's a distinction I've been trying to fight and say, never use N95 and mask together. A mask is not a respirator, whereas N95, N99, those things are all respirators, okay? So that's the first and foremost thing. Every other explanation was brilliant, okay? But when we say N95, we should use the term respirator and not the mask, because to use an N95 respirator, you got to be fit tested. But to use a surgical mask, not an N95 surgical, again, there's a distinction. To use a surgical mask, if you go to your dentist's office, they do not get fit tested. That means the filtration efficiency is not guaranteed, whereas if it's an N95, you've been fit tested, the filtration efficiency is guaranteed. So having been a professor for 30 seconds, let me become a common citizen. So when we talk about surgical mask versus the face coverings or the regular cloth masks, what we are talking about is both of them are essentially for the general public. I mean, until now, you would not think of going to a store and buying a surgical mask, the blue colored ones, right? Or the yellow colored ones. But now we have started doing it as common citizens, right? And then you got the cloth masks, which you can use and reuse. So as Emily said, the main distinction is the surgical mask, the blue and the yellow colored ones, they also have fluid barrier protection, which a cloth mask may not necessarily have it may seep through. Okay, that is the distinction. The other thing, what we generally call a surgical mask or a medical mask is a medical mask in particular is something that is typically disposable, whereas the cloth mask that you're doing is obviously usable for multiple times. Okay, unfortunately, in this last year, some of us have had to use the N95, and as people like Emily have had to use it multiple times because we have had shortages. But in reality, N95 is a single use. Once you finish seeing one patient, you are supposed to discard it and move forward. So, Kamiko?
Adrian, I see you're ready to say something.
Yes.
I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I just want to expand a little bit, a different take, a nuance in the difference between them is in terms of the regulation. And so when you're talking about what's used by healthcare workers versus the public, what, as was mentioned earlier by Emily, is like they're both NIOSH approved and FDA cleared. And so to be able to do that, and they've gone through a set of standards that they've shown that their mask performs to, or their N95 performs to. This looks at their filtration efficiency. This looks at fit. There's actually a way to fit to standardize that. NIOSH has created 5 different size head forms for occupational workers, and so that people can size their mask appropriately against those 5 heads. So unfortunately, that was not looked at for pediatrics because that was not envisioned at that time. Because these are for again, occupational workers. So healthcare workers comprise a portion of that, but then others just working, whether it's construction, whatever, that needs filters, they would also need that. But that's how manufacturers and designers look at those head forms. And that's something that's actually freely available from NIOSH to get these different head form sizes, because these are measured from a number of different thousands of bases, I believe, to kind of come up with these 5 different standard sizes to at least get an idea of what fits. So the public, this brings up a very big gap that we came across this past year, that there isn't something that was out there as a standard to say this is what a public mask must do. There's been a lot of things that we've all learned over the course of the year. And there's a lot of disagreements in terms of what do you need. So that's one thing that's been in the works for a while. And the ASTM recently came out with a standard specifically for cloth barrier masks to address this gap. Because part of what we've seen is that a number of manufacturers that are selling masks to the public, they make a number of claims. And that, that they protect you, they kill this, they do that, and we use this material, so it's much better than that. None of this is backed though, and that's part of the problem. So by coming up with at least a standard, that this first standard, it's a way of trying to get things standardized across the board in terms of if someone says they meet this standard, we at least know it has this minimum criteria that it met. And this is just the first pass. This was moving quickly to try to get something out there that we can all use as a guide. But again, as we learn and we start trying to see what people need, that can be expanded on. But that's one of the big things that we're kind of doing in parallel, and actually with this challenge is part of what we're looking to learn as well. What comes in, what do we need to do, and where are there gaps on our end, and from testing them. And so if there's something that's innovative, there may not be a test for it yet, but that's something that would then challenge us to say, okay, but that's a really good idea. What can we do to try to create a test for that? And so this is going to be something that works together to kind of ultimately get at the same end goal, is to get something that's going to help all of us. Thank you.
Yeah, those are all really great points, and kind of leads me to my next question for you guys. And Adrian, we can start with you since you're in the hot seat. So what do you see as the opportunities to increase consumer trust in the masks that people use? And that's a very open-ended question, but feel free to take it whichever direction you would like.
For me, one of the things that I've seen over the past year, it's like is a lot of disagreements in terms of what a mask is for. And as much as we would like to say, wear this for someone else, we can't force that. It's like, and not everyone feels that same way. It's like, and if you only tell someone that you're wearing it for yourself, you're not protecting yourself, then there's a lot of animosity to people that aren't wearing a mask. And not to look at anything further, but just if there's some kind of way for you to know what kind of protection do you have. And I think that would go a long way to at least helping people, if they do buy something, to know that they're protected to the certain level. It's like, and not just have to believe some manufacturer or they claim something, and have some kind of reassurance that there's something backed with science or testing, something to show that whatever they're buying has some level of protection, or whatever they feel that they need for that particular person. And so that way it's a little bit more individual basis and focus. And if your risk is a little bit different than someone else, and maybe you need a little bit more efficiency if you have a health concern, for example. So just having some of that guidance, it's like to be able to say, what does this mask actually do, and not just based on what a manufacturer claims. I think that would help a lot for people to choose what they want and feel comfortable with whatever they buy.
Are we able to ask questions?
There'll be a Q&A at the end. We'll save 10 minutes for that.
And feel free to toss questions in the chat just so that folks aren't distracted during the panel.
So yeah, there's been a lot of really great questions in the chat. We'll get to those near the end, but Sundaresan, all you.
If I could just add to what Adrian said, trust, right? That is the most important thing. And trust, but verify. That is very important. So if you say my mask is antibacterial, that doesn't help anything unless you can prove not only does it kill bacteria, but more importantly, it is safe. That is the most important thing here, because I don't want to have something on my face that is not going to, that's going to cause me harm. So trust in the functionality of the product, trust in the safety of the product are very, very critical. So which means there should be full, what materials you're using. You got to make sure the materials that go into it, whether it is the fibers, whether it's the closures, what kind of allergies, skin allergies it is likely to cause. I mean, those are some of the things you need to take. So if I were designing, I would say, okay, what materials are going into every component of it? Let's say some people said, can I go and use a filter that is in my what do you call the vacuum cleaner? Can I use that filter? You don't know how safe or safe it is going to be for the end user. So as long as you can trust being scientific data and the fact that the materials are harmless, then you can also demonstrate the functionality in terms of whether it's a filtration efficiency or the breathing resistance, then you are going to be able to get buy-in from the end user. And Adrian talked about whether my mask protects you or your mask protects me. I mean, the key thing here is if you have a barrier, it is going to act both ways. Sometimes it may be different in how the efficacy may be different, but it's going to be a barrier nevertheless. So that is also very important to realize. But by having a face covering, you're not just protecting yourself, but you're also protecting others. But it's not just you're protecting only others, but you're also protecting yourself. So trust is the key thing here.
And I think understanding too, it's, people go around, and when N95 respirators became short in supply, everyone went out and they bought the KN95s. And they said, well, it's got the 95 and the KN, it means it's just as good. But again, going back to what we talked about earlier, the fit isn't there. And so understanding the purpose of wearing the mask and how to wear it properly is going to be a key component to comfort levels and preventing people from putting themselves in hazardous situations, which is going to decrease the most important component, and that's the trust component.
Yes, and also until now, we had a lot of doubt whether my mask will protect me, or if the mask which I bought it from the market will protect me. Until now, we did not have a good standard, but recently, like what Adrian said, there is the ASTM released. So when we buy the mask, at least we can check whether that is compatible with the ASTM. So that it give us the good comfort. Until now, people use a cotton fabric. And we tested a cotton fabric with the 1 layer, 2 layer, 3 layers. It's like we tested up to 8 layers. Actually, with the 8 layers of the cotton fabric has less than 10% the filtration efficiency. So, so which means that until now, we are not sure whether our mask has a good filtration efficiency with any material which we use to make a mask. But since we have the ASTM, we will have more comfort, and we can find a better mask to protect ourselves.
Wow, less than 10% filtration efficiency for an 8-ply with cotton. Can you expand on that a little bit for us, and why that might be the case? Because that sounds a little counterintuitive to what you might think.
Okay, so like I explained to you earlier, most of filter is made of non-woven fabric, which non-woven fabric does not have the regular structure. It is very irregular structure, which means the fibers laid in a very irregular. Unlike the woven fabric, which made for our suit or our shirt, or the knitted fabric, which used for our undergarment. Okay? So that non-woven fabric, since that is a very irregular fiber distributed to make a fabric, that filters out a lot of bad things. But the cotton fabric, most of the cotton fabric, handkerchief fabric, is made of woven fabric, which has a very regular structure. which regular structure make the small holes to when the fibers the warp and weft the cross. So that's why the filtration goes down. So that's why the woven fabric, which we typically use for the bandana, does not help for the filtration.
So I guess leading to our last question before we can get to the Q&A, and thank you for that. And it's sort of related to what you've already mentioned and, you know, kind of what people have evaluated through their own experiments in terms of materials. But what do you see as the new opportunities or technologies that have emerged over the past year, really, or even further for mask and respirator developers?
Let me take since there's a pause. Let me try to take a stab at it. A couple of things that people have begun to do is first and foremost, can we potentially scan a person's face and to be able to make a mask that is more, you know, in tune and customized to the individual. Okay, so there's some of the products that you see in the market are looking at, can I make a frame-like structure that I can put on my face and then be able to change my filtration efficiency. That is one thing, because, you know, nowadays it's very easy to scan your face and to be able to do things that are customized to yourself. And then we have also seen people making, you know, trying to put some additives into the product, but they may be able to improve the filtration efficiency, but the safety of those things has not been proven, right? They add some materials, but that has not been proven. So in terms of, and also people are trying to think in terms of what kind of new materials that we could use to be using some, you know, we have seen some papers where they talk about using nanomaterial based filters and nano additives and things like that to be able to improve the performance of the masks or the materials that are going into it. So those are some of the trends that we are seeing.
And another trend which I can see is size variation. Until now, we did not have the different size of the mask. The respirator has the two different sizes, the regular and or the small. And the surgical mask has only one size, which that does not fit to small children, and also that does not fit to the person who has a small face, which occurs a lot of leakage around it. So, but I can see that there are a lot of different studies, ergonomic studies going on. So it gives the good size for making different, like a small, medium, large, or male for male or female, and also even for the children. So that is the good development, which I can see.
I think the other thing that also people are looking into now, and you hear it talked more and more, is one thing that we didn't talk about was the importance of the electrostatic forces for the filtration capability of these non-woven masks. And one thing that became painfully obvious early on in the pandemic was the difficulty of obtaining these non-woven materials that are made in a specific way that have these electrostatic capabilities. And now looking at non-woven materials that are alternatively produced that might not be as dependent on those electrostatic capabilities for that filtration capacity, because they're easier to reuse. You don't have to deal with recharging or loss of charge. And it may be easier to set up infrastructure within the US, which there isn't good infrastructure right now to make that type of material. There's a small infrastructure, but most of that infrastructure is overseas, focusing on alternative methods for the non-wovens that we can focus on US production as well.
And Adrian, do you have any thoughts on what you see as the newest opportunity or interesting technology that's emerged over the past year?
Well, I think it's less so much that aspect, but taking a twist on that is that there's a lot more interest and commercial availability and that's driving this. And so you know, when nothing's changed for decades, it's like there's been no real innovation or push to change masks. And it's been accepted that these are disposable masks for healthcare workers. They use it, they throw it away. That's just how it works. And there's a lot of assumptions built into that. And the same thing with the public, while in other countries that may be commonplace, it has not been here in the US. And so now that there are a lot more wares, it's like, and now there's a lot more opportunity for companies with different technologies they use for other types of things. It's like they can now be potentially applied to this, where before they weren't necessarily interested in the healthcare market because that was pretty much locked up by a few key players. Now this is a wide open game that they can get in and potentially push something different. So it's not necessarily new technologies as it is applying different technologies that already exist to a new application. So that I think that's just another opportunity that we're seeing open up. It's like, so some of the ideas that were already mentioned are some of the examples.
Yeah, and that's something that we're really trying to accomplish with the initiative that we have here, and in partnership with NIOSH. How can we create a more inclusive design that people want to wear? And related to that, I saw a really interesting question in the chat, and I'm gonna start picking out some of the questions in there that we can talk about. One of them was facial hair. So how do you design the fit of a mask when you have facial hair?
That's been the bane of N95 respirators. I mean, if you're a physician, then it's kind of hard. Correct me if I'm wrong, Emily, that you could not have a beard and still be able to use it. So, but I think with the textile materials and with the by being able to use elastic materials, I think to some extent we can address the issue of hair. But it's I cannot think of a way whereby we could completely eliminate the fact that you're going to create some gaps between the face and the mask, except you could potentially tighten it by using some elastic materials. So.
Just to push that a little bit differently, if you're looking on the more innovative side as opposed to the traditional mask, and there's people that are talking about potential like air curtains supplying fresh air. So now that's something that is not reliant on per se fitting on your face. It's supplying the air in front of you. And so that would be something that would address that issue. But again, that's something we can do and make it inexpensive enough that that's feasible for people to wear normally. So just another take on it.
And again, something for everyone that's listening to remember, the competition isn't to build a better respirator. We're not looking to optimize on N95s. We're looking to build something that is good for the masses. So yes, where you're not going to get a perfectly tight fit because of facial hair, if you can get a better fit than you do now, that's good. It's to limit airflow. It's not to prevent airflow altogether from the outside of the mask. If you can eliminate airflow from the top of the mask where you don't have facial hair, or I should hope that you don't have that much facial hair, you're going to prevent glasses from fogging. That's a big complaint too. So there are mitigating factors that you can throw on your mask that aren't going to make these respirator quality, but are going to make these good enough for everyday public use, because everyday public use doesn't need that super tight fit because they're not going to be fit tested to even make sure that you have that seal.
You're on mute, Kimiko.
Yep, I muted myself. You'd think we get used to it by now, but it always sneaks up on you. So one last question before we answer some final questions about the challenge that I've seen in the chat. I do want to ask, and this is an interesting question, but I'm going to try to reword it a little bit in a way that I think makes sense. So when it comes to overall filtration efficiency, how does that relate to aerosols versus particulates? And are they evaluated equally?
We've got people from NPPTL who are better at answering this because they are much better at, they do this for a living. So I'll probably defer to my colleague, Mike Bergman, who is on the line. So.
All right, Mike, this is your time to shine. I see you're on the line.
Yes. Hello, everybody. So nice to talk to you. Thank you for all of the participants here. And I know many of the panel members, so I'm very glad to see them. generally, you're thinking about this mask doing two things to stop particles. The larger droplets, which a lot of people term as aerosols. I think generally there's, people talk about something being airborne as less than 5 micrometers in size. But the mask itself, for stopping whatever particles are in the air, if you're thinking about those particles getting into the mask, if they're large sort of droplets, they can just be stopped as the barrier of the material itself. If they're small particle aerosols, now we're talking about less than a micrometer, that's really where the filter material comes in and does its job at actually catching those small particles within the filter. So, I think for a mask like we're talking here for the general public, yes, you do want that mask to be able to filter somewhat at the sub-micron level, because if these are small particles that are airborne, that are still floating throughout the air, you do want them to be filtered out by the filter material. And then, of course, if it's a large droplet, somebody coughing and sneezing, a lot of those large droplets can just be projected onto, projected at the person's face, and you want that mask to stop those as well, just at the surface. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. And Sundaresan, do you have anything to add before we change gears a little bit?
No, when the gods speak, I listen. So.
Well,
so much
thank
too
you.
kind. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our panelists and our impromptu panelist, Mike Bergman, for joining us. I do want to quickly answer some of the questions that we have in the chat about the challenge. So, will the submission be purely electronic? Yes, it is. For phase 1, it's an ideation phase. We're accepting ideas on paper. We are not accepting proof of concept designs or any physical designs at this point for testing. We cannot give any details at this point for phase 2, but phase 2 is focused on proof of concept testing for those who are actually selected as finalists. But again, unfortunately, until this information is public, we aren't able to share it with you. So I encourage you to continue checking the challenge.gov site for updates, and we'll actually be publicizing it when we are ready to release the details for phase 2. Let me see some of the other questions that came up. We do only allow 1 submission per person, and that is regardless of actual innovation track. So please only submit 1 per person to be considered. And at this point, let me make sure I'm not missing anything else. There was many questions and many of my colleagues have already answered it, so thank you. And if you have any other questions that we haven't answered, feel free to reach out to the Drive comments at hhs.gov, and we'll get back to you as quickly as possible to answer your questions. The challenge will be closing phase 1 on April 21st, so get your submission in as soon as possible. There's still time. We can't tell you how many submissions that we have received, but I'll just say that there is still an opportunity to get your idea in. And please clearly read all of the challenge.gov posting information, because it actually has questions to most of your answers. So with that, we are at 4 o'clock. I hope that you enjoyed this panel and the whirlwind of questions that we threw at our very experienced and wonderful panelists. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. I hope you have a nice day.